Hi, and welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet, a weekly program providing you with the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne. Coming up, across the country, health professionals are raising diabetes awareness. A nurse practitioner at the Fleischer Institute for Diabetes and Metabolism at Montefiore Health System joins me to discuss the chronic illness. What are the two types of diabetes and how do they affect your health? Then President Joe Biden pardons thousands of Americans convicted on prior federal charges of marijuana possession. The Director of Drug Markets and Legal Regulation at the Drug Policy Alliance joins me for a discussion. What impact will this have on Black and Brown people from lower income communities? After that, hundreds of asylum-seeking migrants entered New York City on buses. As they navigate the New York City shelter system, Bronx organization Oyate Group is making an effort to further support migrant youth. The Chief Operating Officer of Oyate Group joins me for discussion on this effort. How is the migrant crisis putting a strain on public schools? And finally, with a mission to provide quality education for English language learners, the founder of the American Dream School joins me for a discussion on what this means for the Latinx community and the Bronx school system. Why is Latinx representation important for students in the Bronx? So please stick around. Open BxRx Tuesday starts now. Welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne, and I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. In the month of November, healthcare professionals across the country are raising diabetes awareness. Diabetes is a chronic illness affecting millions of Americans, and Dr. Edwin Torres, a nurse practitioner at the Montefiore Health System, joined me to discuss the signs, symptoms, and more. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for bringing awareness to this very important cause and something that affects the community in the Bronx.
Yeah, so I kind of want to dig a little bit deeper into that. But before we talk about all those facts and stuff, can you just explain, what diabetes is, if there is anybody out there who isn't sure exactly how, the illness affects your body?
So in a very simple term, diabetes, all it means is that your blood sugar in your body is elevated above normal, and your body is having issues trying to control it. So when that takes place, we call it diabetes. Diabetes in a very PG-13 version is high blood sugar in the blood.
Now, I understand that there are two types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. Can you just explain the difference and how they affect your body?
So type 1 diabetes, it is a disease in which the pancreas doesn't produce enough insulin, so it can keep up with the metabolic demand, or doesn't produce none at all. And these folks, they need insulin in order for the body to bring the sugar into the cells. So type 1 has to do directly with the pancreas with insulin production. Type 2, it is a different type of disease. They present both with high blood sugar, but in type 2, you have different organs that play a role into the glucose regulation. Not only the pancreas, you also have the liver, you have the kidneys, and other organs that are contributing to this elevated blood sugar.
Now, I also want to touch on quickly pre-diabetes. Can you quickly let us know what that's all about?
Pre-diabetes, it is a stage in which when I look at it just like when you look at a red light, when you look at a traffic light, I mean, you have green, you can think of that as, normal blood sugar. Then you have the yellow in which your body is telling you, look, I'm having some elevated sugar, not yet to be diagnosed, please pay attention. And then the red is when we get you to a diagnosis. We do something called a hemoglobin A1C, which takes a picture of how your blood sugar has been in the past 3 months. And when we get that blood, we can see how you have been. So if you have an A1C between 5.7 and 6.4, that is considered prediabetes.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about the diagnosis and the genetics of it all. As you mentioned, so many people in our country are affected by this. I'm curious to know, how often will genetics determine whether or not someone is diagnosed with diabetes?
Um, so understanding your genetic risk factor, understanding your family history is very important, especially for those with type 2. So many of our patients, one of the first things that we do is we look at your family history, and that is put into the picture of, where your current health is, and then, where you are. And that will help us create a plan as to how we're going to move forward. Type 1 is more of an abrupt, diagnosis. These patients typically, when they find out they have type 1, they come into the ER with something called diabetes ketoacidosis, and they just find out they have diabetes really abruptly.
Now, according to the CDC, and I was actually very shocked to learn this, people with less education were more likely to have been diagnosed with diabetes. Can you explain, what are some of the factors that may contribute to that finding?
So we understand that the social determinants of health play a role into your health. In the social determinants of health, you're looking at various risk factors that will put you at a higher risk for developing diabetes and other diseases. Health literacy and literacy overall, it is very important for the patient, the community to know, because based on this understanding, then you're going to make choices in regards to your health.
Now, what are some other risk factors that may contribute or cause a person to be diagnosed with diabetes?
So the biggest risk factor to developing diabetes is age. As we get older, our body also gets older. But you have some factors that you can control and others that you cannot. Those that you cannot control is getting older. We're all going to get there. But the ones that we can control, such as, you know, physical activity, nutrition, these are things that we can work on. But your zip code determines more of your health outcome than actually your genetics. So it's very important for us to be cognizant of our surroundings, because based on where we live, what we have, the options that we have, then we're going to make some of the health decisions, based on this.
Now, what are some of the symptoms? I know that type 2 is the most common, so I'm going with that one. What are the symptoms in regards to that?
The most common symptoms that patients that will start to have is frequent urination. A lot of folks, they'll tell you, gosh, I'm getting up at night 4 or 5 times, increased thirst. Sometimes sudden weight loss can take place. Also, blurry vision. So if you start to have some of these symptoms, if you have a wound that is not healing as fast as it did before, we'll recommend that you come and check with your providers. It's very important to know that 34 million Americans have diabetes, and about 20% of those do not know that they have it. When you go to the pre-diabetes stage, you have 96 million Americans who have pre-diabetes, and 80% of those do not know that they have pre-diabetes.
Now, is this something that if your doctor notices it, they will let you know, or do they usually wait until it's diabetes?
So there are guidelines that we have to follow. So recently, the American Diabetes Association, they changed their guideline in which they are telling us that we should start screening patients at the age of 35. Previously, it was 45. And if you look today, even at the CDC, they still have the age of 45. So we're learning more and more as to how we can better screen patients so we can start treating them early.
Now, can you actually talk a little bit about insulin and what that does to help those with diabetes?
So insulin is a hormone that we produce ourselves. Those of us who don't have diabetes, or before you have diabetes, your body produces insulin. So insulin is a hormone that we produce. Now, when we give you insulin, it's to help you bring that sugar into the cells. So think about it as the key that helps you open the door and that allows you to bring whatever you need to bring inside your house, because we don't want that sugar to hang inside the vascular system, because that elevated blood sugar is what gets us into trouble.
Now, there's a lot of conversation on the accessibility of insulin. Can you just explain why does this remain such a complicated, and complex discussion?
It is a complex discussion because insulin, for some patients, it is not an option. It is their life. If you have type 1 diabetes, you don't have an option of whether you can afford it or you cannot. This is something you depend on. And we have to remember that insulin is a technology that has been around for 100 years. The fact that in America today, we have folks that are struggling to get insulin, it is something that we have to look ourselves as a society and really ask ourselves, is this what we are? And is this what we want? Because we are a rich country. We should be able to take care of those folks who develop diabetes and who need this medication.
So I'm really glad that you brought it up because you brought up type 1. So insulin is for people who have type 1 diabetes, not necessarily like if you just have diabetes in general, you're going to have insulin.
Exactly. So those who have type 1, it's non-negotiable. You have to take insulin because your pancreas doesn't produce it. For those with type 2, they have, they could be on insulin. That is a medication that we use, but we have other options of medication that we can treat them with, depending on where they are in their disease.
Now, what preventative measures could be taken to avoid a diabetes diagnosis?
We always tell our patient that the first building block is, a healthy diet and exercise. So we want folks to exercise at least 3 times a week. And exercise doesn't necessarily have to be that you go to the gym. I tell my patients, if you take the train, try to walk to the next stop, if not the following, because this is physical activity that you are incorporating into your lifestyle. If you live in a walk-up building, try to walk up, a few times and skip the elevator, because the more physical activity we add, the more demand we create for our body and the more that sugar gets utilized so we can keep those numbers controlled.
Now, I want to focus on New York a little bit. According to NYC.gov, African Americans and Hispanic/Latino Americans are amongst those who face a very high risk of being diagnosed with diabetes. Can you just talk a little bit more about that and explain why we're seeing this pattern?
In general, African Americans, Latino, they tend to live in communities that are disadvantaged. They are deserts for food, they are desert for walkability, they are desert for having access to physical facilities. It is very important to know that if you are of Latino, you are African American, you tend to be diagnosed at a younger age. And also the disease is a little bit more aggressive. So it's very important for those who are in this high risk category group to pay attention to their bodies and follow up with the providers so we can avoid later on some of these complications, because we can perhaps prevent or delay the diagnosis of diabetes.
Now, as we mentioned, literacy and just education is just so important in regards to our health. And I know it's something that a lot of people of the Bronx can definitely benefit from. Can you just let people know how they can get tested and, just how they can learn more about diabetes?
At Montefiore this month of November, we have a full calendar of events. And please go and check us out at montefiore.org/diabetes month, in which we will be offering free educational courses for the community. But you can also access the Department of Health or the CDC to get reliable information. I want our community to understand that many folks are preyed upon from unreliable sources. So please go to the Diabetes Association or the CDC or the Department of Health, which are reliable sources to get information about diabetes.
All right. Dr. Torres, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having us. I appreciate it.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday.
built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at bronxnet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
Welcome back. In an effort to decriminalize marijuana, President Joe Biden pardoned any American convicted on prior federal charges of simple marijuana possession. For decades, activists have fought to decriminalize the recreational use of marijuana, while these charges negatively affected thousands of Americans. Director of Drug Markets and Legal Regulation at the Drug Policy Alliance, Kat Packer, joined me to discuss the impact this will have on our country. Kat, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, can you discuss the long-time effort from many advocates across the country to decriminalize marijuana?
Yes, advocates have been working for decades to decriminalize cannabis. Here in the United States, cannabis has been illegal here in the United States since 1937 with the Marijuana Tax Act. But starting with California, folks began to try to decriminalize cannabis, essentially removing penalties for cannabis-related activity. And that could include possession, but also increasingly is including other types of cannabis activity to include sales as well.
Now, can you talk a little bit about the history of cannabis and its relationship with mass incarceration?
Absolutely. I think that we have to continuously talk about the relationship between cannabis prohibition and mass incarceration. There was an author, Michelle Alexander, who in her book, The New Jim Crow, articulated the relationship as this. She said that nothing has contributed more to the systematic mass incarceration of people of color in the United States than the war on drugs. And through research and data that's been collected by advocates and the FBI at this point, it's very clear that most of all drug arrests have been for cannabis. About 80% of cannabis arrests have been for things like simple possession. And this has really allowed the US prison system to balloon over the course of the last several decades. And if you look at the arrest statistics and the conviction statistics, you'll see that overwhelmingly the folks who were impacted by these laws were Black and brown communities.
Now, you mentioned the war on drugs, and we're talking about just mass incarceration in regards to marijuana. Can you just talk about the impact this had on Black and brown people from low-income communities? How did this affect children? How did this affect their families? Stuff like that.
Absolutely. So even a arrest or conviction for simple marijuana possession could mean that folks' entire lives were disrupted. Folks with cannabis arrests and convictions could be subject to discrimination in housing, employment, education, the very things that we strive for in society. And one of the most harmful aspects is that communities were displaced. I mean, we were literally putting folks in cages for their engagement with cannabis-related activities, and it's had extremely adverse impacts on individuals personally and on their families and communities collectively. Not to mention that for youth in particular, it meant denied access to opportunities and could very well be the thing that prevented them from moving forward with different opportunities in life.
I'm really glad that you talked about that because we tend to focus these conversations on just the adults. But as we know, like what we're seeing now with vaping and, all of that stuff that teenagers, have partaken, drug use just in general. And I wonder like if they were met with, a learning lesson or, met as a health issue as opposed to, strictly just sending them off to prison or to jail. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that and, how it affected them later on in life. Now, I think it's really important to note that this is only for simple possession of marijuana. First, can you just explain what the Biden administration means by that? And, what is considered a simple possession?
Absolutely. So part of the Biden announcement recently articulated that there was going to be a pardoning for individuals with federal convictions for simple cannabis possession. And what we know thus far is that there are about 6,500 individuals who may be eligible, in addition to some what we expect to be a few thousand individuals in DC, because the federal government enforces DC's cannabis laws. When we're talking about simple possession, we're literally talking about possession of a specific threshold for cannabis. Under the Controlled Substances Act, individuals can be charged with simple possession if they possess 50 kilograms or less of cannabis. Anything in excess of that would be considered trafficking. But it's also important to note that the line that's drawn both at the federal level and the state level between cannabis users and cannabis sellers is very blurry. And you could have individuals who sold either small amounts of cannabis, or even, for example, taking cannabis and putting it into a plastic bag could be considered manufacturing, can be considered cannabis manufacturing, such that that is no longer a simple possession charge, but could be considered cannabis trafficking. And so I think that there is an increasing need not only to address individuals who have these federal simple possession charges, but to review all of cannabis charges. And that's particularly important because President Biden, in his rationale for articulating why he thought that we shouldn't continue this failure, as he articulated it, is because there are many states where this activity is legal. Well, the reality is that there are an increasing number of states where what would previously have been considered trafficking is legal. And not only is it legal, but it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so we should not continue to have folks hemmed up for these charges when folks are making profit all around the country.
I'm so glad that you actually brought that up because I wanted to talk about that. I've noticed just in the past few years, the cannabis industry, as you mentioned, is worth millions and millions of dollars. Should there just be an extreme or an extra effort to help those, people who sold marijuana, because it's all over like our media, it's almost glorified in a way. And so it is strange to see that there are still some people who are still in the shadows in regards to this.
Yeah, it's a tale of two cities. We have America where folks are living in completely different realities. And the reality is largely, if you are a white individual, cannabis has largely been legal for these communities, and that it's not been these communities who have been targeted. Now, part of what President Biden acknowledged is that use amongst white and Black communities is the same, but the arrests were disproportionately targeted to Black and Brown communities. And that's not just the case for simple possession. That is the case when we look at cannabis, what's considered trafficking at the federal level. And so we want to make sure that we are advocating that no one get left behind. The entirety of cannabis prohibition and criminalization has been a failure, not just individuals with past cannabis convictions. And the other piece of this too is that it does not, his pardon does not address folks who would be charged with simple possession in the future. It is a one-time clemency, pardon provided to these individuals, but it does not stop folks in the future from being charged with the exact same penalty that we've now acknowledged as a failure.
Wow, thank you so much for clarifying that, because those are the little details that I think sometimes get lost. Now, I know the Department of Justice is working to devise a process for those covered by Biden's pardon to receive a certificate of pardon. Will this be helpful in regard to those looking for employment, housing, etc.? Just because we know that those things on your record can affect whether or not you get a job or housing. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So this is where this particular announcement in the pardon will have the greatest benefit, and that these 6,500 plus individuals have up until this point continued to be potentially denied opportunities for housing, education, and employment. And with this pardon, they should be able to have those particular liberties, those civil liberties restored, and be able to participate in society in ways that they may have been previously denied. However, it's also important to articulate that this pardon does not erase their criminal, the criminal record or conviction. It essentially would appear on the individual's record alongside the original conviction. And this is part of the reason why advocates are saying that it's not enough just to pardon these individuals, but that individuals actually should have the records cleared entirely for that particular simple possession offense.
So we have just a little bit of time left, but I really want to touch on this. Do you think there should be an effort, or will there be an effort to offer transition or just support to people, who are coming from a very hostile environment to essentially normal society? Because I know that a lot of people talk about, what happens inside prisons and jails is just really traumatic. So will there be any effort to address that?
I think that there absolutely should be. And that's why I think that the president's announcement really is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of acknowledging the harms that communities have experienced and identifying those communities that have experienced that harm. I think that because we know who these individuals are, we should be making an effort to identify specifically how their past criminal conviction for simple possession has impacted them, and make sure that they have equitable access to programming that would support them, particularly in those areas that we know that they were denied access to opportunities like housing, like education, like employment. That has to be a part of how we move this conversation forward. It would be completely harmful if we move forward with commercialization and do not address the continued criminalization, the continued collateral consequences that individuals face. And now that we know who these individuals are, I think we need to be prepared to have them restored, made whole, because that's the type of disruption that cannabis prohibition allows.
Now, can you just let everybody know how they can stay up to date with your organization?
Absolutely. You can find us at drugpolicy.org or at drugpolicy on Twitter.
All right, Kat, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. Over the past few months, hundreds of Latin migrants entered New York City seeking asylum. Entering the city on buses, migrants have been sent to several shelters throughout NYC, many of which reside in the Bronx. Making an effort to serve and uplift migrant children, Bronx organization Oyate Group is implementing programs to further support migrant youth. The Chief Operating Officer of Oyate Group, Jason Autar, joined me to discuss this effort. Jason, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me and our organization today. Definitely appreciate it.
Now, can you talk about the situation New York City is seeing with migrants entering the city?
Yeah, the way that our organization views it is this is a humanitarian crisis, and our city is tasked with providing just essential resources for these individuals that have been bused here from the border, and so we have to marshal resources as quickly as possible, and it is an insurmountable task. And so I think right now the city is kind of getting its ducks in a row. Because when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, we have to provide not just housing, but just opportunities for these families that are coming over here. And we're not just talking about one or two individuals, we're talking at times entire swaths of families. So I think what we're seeing right now is just the city trying to implement as best as they can and piecemealing it. And it's not something that I wish on any type of government in order to do. But at this point in time, I think the city is trying its best to like I said, just implement as many resources as it can to help these individuals, get their lives in order, so to speak.
Now, I know that a lot of the families have been sent to the Bronx. Can you just explain why we're seeing that?
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with just demographics in general. When you look at just the Bronx, we do have a large Latino population, and specifically, it's been a growing population of Mexican individuals in the southern part of the Bronx. So I think that's why folk are being placed here, because when we look at communities, people want to be close to ties, right? So whether it be familial ties, through friends, language, customs, things of that sort. And so I think the Bronx provides that opportunity for these individuals to access. And so that's why we are seeing an influx of individuals coming here.
Now, according to Mayor Adams, this has been overwhelming New York City shelters. With that understanding, can you talk about how this is affecting the Bronx in particular, just because the Bronx is known just to be a borough that is already struggling with resources? Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, at this point in time, just kind of figuring out where individuals are going to be placed, like I said, it's tough. And so I think the mayor is just trying to figure out through his team and through other city council members is how can we piecemeal and how can we effectively place individuals. There is not a right answer and there's not a wrong answer. I think it just has to fit, toward the population that we're seeing. So it's not something that I have great insight into, but I know, just taking a step back out and as a nonprofit, it does seem like a really, really large task for the city to appropriately place individuals at this point in time.
Now, I know your organization is focusing on migrant youth, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But before we delve into that, I just want to know, can you talk about how the migrant crisis is also straining public schools? Because prior to this, I had no idea that was being affected.
Yeah, one of our partner schools actually that we are known for our vaccine program that we did. We vaccinated about 40,000 individuals during the height of the pandemic, and so one of the schools that we partnered with in the South Bronx, they are being affected by the migrant crisis because of the fact that they have now predominantly Spanish speaking or Spanish speaking only young people that are being placed in the schools, and so now they have to marshal their resources in order to positively service these individuals. So with that, it brings a whole host of challenges because the schools themselves, they're charged with not just being able to service the individual but also the entire family. And so while it may seem like it is a difficult task, I think it's a positive one because schools are trusted entities, and with these trusted entities, I think that families can begin to just gain resources, but then also have access to a larger array of resources. And so, it's going to be, we're not going to see gains and dividends in the short term. I think this is for the long term haul. And so that's why it's important, for us as a city to provide these resources for these individuals.
Now, why did your organization want to take a moment to uplift and focus on undocumented youth in particular?
Yeah, I think for us, what we've recognized is that there are stopgaps in the services that the city provides, and the city does provide a whole host of resources. But we also understand that these resources are not catered toward undocumented folk. And so when we look at the fact that there are undocumented youth that are in New York City public schools or in our school system in general, whether they be charter or parochial or anything of that sort, we understand that that is a stopgap, and they're not provided the same access to resources in the form of, let's say, the Summer Youth Employment Program, or SYEP. So for us, we saw it as an opportunity to take this time to provide just an opportunity for these young people where they're able to be placed and gain some job skills because obviously they're not going anywhere and they are part of the fabric of our community. And so it's important for us to provide access to resources, but it's also important for them to develop their skills. And so that's what we felt was important as we are at this critical juncture, not just at this time in our city, but also in our country as well.
Now, I think that a lot of times when we have these conversations, people tend to focus on the adults, and sometimes children can be left in the dark or left behind. Can you just talk about, some of the challenges migrant children face?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is just communication and just language barriers. And so they may have grown up as speaking predominantly one language, and now coming over here where English is just the kind of the de facto operating language. That's really really difficult. What we've heard from some of the schools is the fact that some of these young people that are coming here, they're not up to grade level. So that poses a whole different issue as well. So it's a multi-faceted, multi-pronged issues that we're facing, and it's not singular. And so we have to look at it from all different lenses, especially when we're talking to young people, because as we know, the ages from 5 to 10 in terms of education are really really important. And if we don't service these young people, they will be lost in the system because they are already at a disadvantage. And so we have to remedy it as quickly as possible, but also do it in the most fashionable and appropriate way for them.
Now, you talked a little bit about what your organization does, just in general, to uplift these children. But I understand that you did have a summer internship program at Fordham University. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so our partnership with Fordham University was spawned off by we actually partnered with a with George Washington High School, where we gave a grant for their they had an arts program, and the director of the arts program, she did indicate that there were quite a few undocumented youth. And so we always have conversations with multiple partners, and Fordham University reached out to us and they said, what are ways that we can partner? And so we pitched the idea of having an undocumented summer youth employment program with them. And it was something that they were definitely interested in. And Fordham was a great partner. They actually placed the students in job settings, and we, as Oyate Group, we actually paid the young people through gift cards, and so they were receiving 500, excuse me, $500 per week through these gift cards, and they would work from Monday through Friday, and Monday through Thursday, from 10 to 5. And then on Fridays, they would come to our offices at 138th Street in the Grand Concourse in the Bronx. And then we would actually do enrichment activities with them, whether it be, developing their resumes, whether it be financial literacy, things of that sort. And then we would also do enrichment activities with them outside of our space, just so that they also have that camaraderie that they're building, but then also providing them with trips and things of that sort, things that they may not have the opportunity to do with their families. So for us, we saw it as a holistic wraparound approach where we're not just giving them jobs, but we're also giving them experience where they're bonding with adults, where they're bonding with other individuals outside of their communities, but they may not have an ability to do so.
Now I understand. Due to the nature of your organization, this isn't the first time that you got together to uplift the community. Can you just tell us a little bit more about your organization and the work that you do in general?
Yeah, so we're an anti-poverty organization, and so for us, we see ways to complement whatever government or nonprofit or social services are doing. So a couple of things that we've done in the past, obviously our vaccine program, but when the fire in the Bronx happened at Twin Peaks, we actually helped to do some fundraising where we were able to bring in $100,000 with small businesses, which they were able to match so that we can provide direct cash relief assistance to the families that were affected by the fire. We've done work with small businesses where we provided, very small, or just grants just in general in order to help them out. We're doing youth programming. We do turkey drives, we do Christmas giveaways, we do a whole host of services in order to fit the needs of the community. Where, again, like I said, just complementing or just providing additional resources for our borough itself.
Now, I think this is really amazing, and this is the kind of work that we love to see within the borough. Can you just talk about, how can people who want to help, how can they get in touch, and then how can people who need the help contact your organization?
Yeah, you can look at us. You can look us up at on our social media websites. It's called Oyate Group on all major websites, whether it be Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter. Or you can visit us on our website itself at the Oyate Group, www.com, oyategroup.org. You can find all updates. We update it pretty regularly, as well as with our social media pages.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you, Kim, and definitely appreciated this.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. One Bronx woman made it her mission to provide quality learning for English language learners and immigrant students. Joining me to talk about her journey with education, Latinx representation, and the state of schools in the Bronx is the founder and head of the American Dream School, Melissa Melkonian. Melissa, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, can you talk about your background that led you into the world of education?
Absolutely. So for me, education is deeply personal, as my relationship with school, as well as my parents' relationship with schools, hit very close to home when thinking about and designing a school in the Bronx. I am originally from El Paso, Texas, uh, daughter of once undocumented Mexican immigrants who sought a piece of the American dream for their children. And so for them, being able to come to the United States and have their children receive a high quality education was all they really wanted. And, you know, when we were in school as young children, we were English language learners. However, the supports were not there for us. And so English was not a language that I actually started learning until about fifth grade. And my relationship with school was difficult, but it was more difficult for my parents because they were unable to interact with the school community, come to parent teacher conferences, be able to be fully integrated or even understand what the educational system was for students. So fast forwarding a couple of years, I become a teacher in New York City, where as I'm teaching, I'm starting to realize that being a classroom teacher, at the time I was a bilingual special education teacher. And I realized that my students did not necessarily have a learning disability or any disability. It was more that they didn't have language access. So they didn't speak English, and thus were put into my classroom, which was fine because it was an eye-opening experience, and I was able to work with them and be able to help them achieve what they needed to achieve at the moment. But then this trend seemed to have continued, where English language learners were not receiving what they needed to receive, and instead were being classified as having disabilities. And so thinking about the need in the Bronx, I was able to identify the South Bronx, where there is a high percentage of students who are classified as English language learners, but also a high percentage of students who, at the time when I founded the school, were not deemed college ready and had very low reading and writing scores on, at that time, city exams.
I wanna chime in and talk because you're talking about the school part, and I just want to know what actually inspired you to create the American Dream School because of the the experiences that you had working elsewhere.
So I wanted to have a school that catered specifically to English language learners, a school where students would feel welcome, a school where we would take everything that our students had and brought to us and take that and use it as an asset. So American Dream is fully bilingual, and it's a 6 through 12 school. So our students start in sixth grade and they are fully integrated in Spanish and English. And for a lot of our students, Spanish is their first language. And so we are able to teach students in a language that they already understand, but also use the content knowledge that they have coming into our school, and not thinking that because they don't speak English fluently, we need to remediate or help them hurry up to learn English, and or teach them, social studies, science, math in English, and our students don't understand. And so for us, being able to take education, to take our approach of teaching our students in two languages is something that we are very proud about, because it helps our students, especially our English language learners, our immigrant students, even our families, be able to enter our school and have us meet them where they're at, so that we can further develop not just the English language, but even their Spanish language.
Can you talk about some of the challenges ESL students face within just New York City public schools?
I think it's really difficult to walk into a school, especially for students who are new to our country, and be expected to assimilate into situations where they don't have experience. the language barrier is very, very difficult to overcome as an English language learner, but it's even more difficult when that barrier also exists for families. And so being able to have a school where we don't just meet our students where they're at, we also help our parents navigate the school system. And the school system, especially in New York City, is a very daunting school system. It is big,
Right. Very complex.
complex to
Right.
even enroll a student in school, right? So when students are transitioning from elementary to middle or from middle to high school, parents are told to go find a school that they believe is best for their students, but it's such a complicated process that, for English speaking parents, let alone for parents who don't speak the language, and
Right.
more so for students,
Right.
because it can become this huge, overwhelming endeavor. And, sometimes our English language learners don't get it right and they select a school that doesn't necessarily have the resources that they may need.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about the ceremony that you held for Hispanic Heritage Month. The little bit that I heard sounded really amazing. Could you just talk about that experience?
Yeah, it was the first time that we held it was the Hispanic World Fair, we called it. It was a month-long project where our students in advisory is another name for homeroom, and our students meet in their advisories every single day, and they were able to research a Hispanic or Latin American country and be able to become experts in that country. And so on that day, we were able to transform every classroom and every possible space that we had to represent uh, 19 countries, so that students and parents and guests would be able to take a Hispanic world tour. We designed passports so that they would go
Oh, that's
into
cool.
Peru, and then they would get stamped with their passport, but that passport also served like as a notebook where students or families would be able to take notes about what they're learning in that country, so they can go from Peru to Colombia to Mexico, Argentina, Venezuela. And what was really beautiful about the whole experience was that students didn't necessarily have heritage from that country necessarily, but learned a great deal. And so for us, it was very humbling to see our students be able to not just integrate with their own culture, but also with other cultures from their peers. We have over 90% of our population do identify as Hispanic or Latino, and it was just an event that was absolutely a beautiful experience. You can see it, hear it. There's music, there's live music, a salsa
That kind
band at each.
of makes me think about representation just in general, and just to see how it kind of lights you up. I could imagine, what it feels for the kids who get to see that. I also want to talk about, the Bronx Charter School of the Arts. They just announced their first Latinx director, executive director of the school. Can you just talk about how important representation is, especially for, young people?
It is absolutely crucial for young people to be able to see themselves in our leaders. And so to be able to have an executive director who is Latina at this school is not just empowering for the school and the community, but for young people in general, because they can identify, they can see themselves, they can see their parents, they can have someone who is familiar with their language and with their culture, and be able to just see that they can be so much more. And so it's growing up in the Bronx, which is highly diverse and a huge community that is heavy in Hispanic and Latinos. It's definitely something that we need more of, especially in our school system, because that's where we interact with our youth the most, is in schools.
Now, I want to talk about, I really do love what you implemented for the kids at your school. And I'm thinking, like, what if more schools around the Bronx, did something like that? Can you just talk about, ways you probably think our education could do a little bit more to make our children feel represented? And, the only time they shouldn't only be learning about their background through tragic or trauma, history. Can you talk a little bit about that and how, maybe some ways we can change that?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely necessary for schools to be able to figure out ways. Unfortunately, I feel like there are a lot of pressures put on education leaders and schools and school administrators to be able to have our students grow academically and meet learning standards and be able to pass tests. But life is a lot more than just being able to pass a test. And so, especially in the Bronx, and especially in communities that are traditionally underserved, we have to do better by our children. And we need to be able to provide opportunities, provide insights, provide perspective that they may not necessarily have or have seen. For example, when we had the Hispanic World Fair, I received a lot of comments from students like, "Wow, we actually have never seen a mariachi in person. Like we've seen memes, we've seen them on TV, but we've never heard or seen like a real mariachi band ever, Seño." Seño is another word for miss, is what they call all of the teachers here. But being able to expose our students to their own culture and validate them I feel like is almost more powerful than making sure that they can read and write and do math. It's just giving them a sense of validation. Like, you are a Mexican American and
Right.
you are welcome to this country, and this is what you add value to, because being American is not just being American. Because one of the things that I strive to push here at American Dream School is that your culture, your language, your identity, your background, your heritage, your ethnicity, all of that is part of what America is, whether you were born here or not. It is the fabric of what this country is supposed to be. And it is okay to be, whatever you identify as, and American. So for myself, it is okay to be Mexican. It is okay to be American. You don't have to be one or the other. You can be both, and there's value in being both. And to help students be able to relate to that and also use that as almost like a push forward, everything else will be a little bit easier, in my opinion.
Now, I think this is amazing. I'm already in love with this school. Can you just let everybody know can you just let parents know how they can learn more?
Absolutely. So if any parent is interested in coming to take a tour or enrolling their students, we do take students in grades 6 through 12. And you can visit our website at www.theamericandreamschool.org and find out more information. You can enroll online if you're having a difficult time. Just give us a call. We will answer. Hablamos español, so we are happy to help parents.
All right, Melissa, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much.
That's all for our show today. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.